Hello friends, my name is Jess and welcome back to my channel, Books Past Bedtime. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite Sapphic books that I read in 2024. I read somewhere in like the 30 to 35 book range of Sapphic romance books throughout the year. And so rather than wasting your time reading all 35 of those to find the few gems, I did that for you and I'm going to tell you which ones you need to read. So the first book I want to talk about is Satisfaction Guaranteed by Carolina Stets Waters. This book was probably my most surprising of the entire year. I went into it like thinking it was going to be kind of an average read. I ended up reading it for my 57 romances off a Goodreads list video that I did a couple months back, and I really wasn't expecting a lot from it, but I ended up loving it. It was honestly so good and such like a refreshing, sweet, cute romance read. In this book, we're following Cade and Selena. Cade is a very much like buttoned up businesswoman, no nonsense, but her great aunt passed away recently and left her a sex toy store. And so she goes to Portland to check this business out with the intention of selling it, likely just checking to see what's going on, if it's a viable business, like what exactly she got left. And when she goes to Portland, she meets Selena, and Selena is the single employee of this sex toy store that her aunt left her. And Selena is very like free-spirited, very much opposite of Cade. This is kind of an opposites attract style romance. They definitely clash and butt heads a lot throughout the story. Selena doesn't want to sell the store. Cade's aunt left Selena part of the store as well. They're like co-owners. And even though they're butting heads, they have to navigate this new business relationship and decide what they're going to do. But along the way, they actually find out that they're pretty good complements to each other, and Cade provides Selena structure where she needs it, and Selena provides Cade like whimsy and more freedom to like loosen up and live life a little more fuller. And so they actually find out that they're very complementary to one another and have a really sweet romance, combined with kind of the hilarity of owning this sex toy store. This was such a sweet romance. I really loved it. I thought it was so fun. It was a really quick and easy read as well, so if you're looking for something like that, this would be a great one. I loved the setting in Portland. It felt very grounded, and I also really just loved the relationship between Cade and Selena. That's definitely the most important part of this book, and I really loved how they didn't like change for each other, but they just simply complimented each other and like taught each other lessons, but they grew together. It felt like a very natural, very mutual, very respectful romance, and I just really loved reading it. It was such a cool thing to see in fiction, and they really made each other like stronger, more true versions of themselves when they were together, which I love. And I also just thought it was so funny. Like the setting in the sex toy store was just ridiculous and campy and so fun. This book was also pretty emotional, with Cade and Selena both having this relationship with this woman who recently passed away. They got to kind of grieve together as well, which was very powerful and very emotional part of the story that I really loved reading about. And I just really loved this one a lot more than I expected to, and I think it's just very underrated, and I think you should read it. Next, I want to talk about Iris Kelly Doesn't Date by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the third and final book in the Bright Falls series, which is a series of interconnected contemporary small town romances following like a friend group of queer women in this small town. And this final book is Iris's book, of course. And Iris is a romance writer, but she's struggling with inspiration for her new book. She doesn't want to be a one-hit wonder. She had a very successful first book, and now the pressure is on to write a second successful book. And so in order to kind of like combat the writer's block, she goes out one night and has this one night stand with this woman named Stevie, except this one night stand is a disaster. Iris kind of wants to like write this off, but she ends up running into Stevie again later, and they get into this hilarious, ridiculous situation where, needless to say, they end up agreeing to a fake date. They kind of make a deal where Stevie will take Iris on like dates and try to spark inspiration for her new romance novel, and Iris will teach Stevie how to date. Stevie is very inexperienced, hence the disastrous one night stand. But of course, as their pretend relationship turns into real chemistry, they kind of have to navigate the transition from fake to real. And also Iris is kind of perpetually single, perpetually like hooking up with people. She has to decide if she's really ready to like take that leap for a real serious relationship. Of course, I love everything that Ashley Herring Blake writes. I definitely think all of her books are worth reading, and I really enjoyed this one. I still think my favorite in the series is probably Astrid's. I loved this one as well. they're all like 4.5 5-star books, so this one is still definitely worth the read, and it was a really great conclusion to the series overall. I really liked Iris and Stevie together. I went into this book kind of thinking that I would relate more to Stevie as kind of like a late bloomer, like not super experienced with romance, but I ended up relating to Iris a lot. Like I really understood her struggles with like her family and just like feeling kind of like imposter syndrome stuff and just like not believing she's like good enough for things, which was really sad, but Stevie helps her out. And Iris and Stevie were just really good with each other. They were again kind of like opposites attract sort of thing, but they really ended up complimenting each other and challenging each other, and I really loved both of these characters. They both felt very full and very realized, and I also love the campy, like ridiculous situations that they got into in the fake dating aspect of the book. It really was very funny, and I loved seeing all of the characters from the previous books. Yeah, this one was a great read, and I can't wait to read whatever Ashley Herring Blake writes next. I also want to talk about Here We Go Again by Allison Cochran. This book is a childhood friends to crushes to enemies to lovers. In it, we're following Logan and Rosemary, who, like I said, were childhood friends and kind of maybe had crushes on each other when they were still trying to figure out their sexualities and who they are as people. This terrible event tore them apart, and then they have not spoken to each other in like 13 years or something, a long time. But they are now teachers at the high school that they grew up going to, and they mostly just kind of avoid each other, but they do still have this connection in a mutual favorite English teacher who happens to be dying of cancer. And this English teacher's last dying wish is for both Rosemary and Logan to take him on a cross-country road trip to his cabin in Maine. I believe they're somewhere in Oregon, in Portland perhaps. Anyway, cross-country road trip. Because Rosemary and Logan both want to honor this teacher's dying wish, I mean, he's really like a father figure to both of them, they begrudgingly agree, and as they drive like from coast to coast, they have to confront their shared past and the painful feelings involved in it, of course have a romance. And this truly was not only such a great romance, but just such a great book. There are so many aspects to the story that make it so incredible. For one, the romance between Logan and Rosemary, incredible. It very much is a slow burn, and it slow burns throughout most of the book, but I feel like that was very realistic because they had so much of a past, so much of a history together. They really had to work through a lot of that before things could progress forward. They both really felt like very real and relatable characters in the way that they were dealing with this like past trauma and like the current trauma with their English teacher. I could see how they like used to be friends, and I really believed in their romance by the end, just because it was so, they were both so real, and the way their romance felt was so realistic that it was very believable to me, and it felt very natural, and I really enjoyed that in a romance book, especially a contemporary romance book. I kind of need the burn, you know, like I like the burn personally. There was so much more to the story than just the romance. The relationship with the teacher who is sick and passing away is just so incredibly sad. The way it was handled was done so well. Like I just felt so much for all of the characters in this book. It was so emotional to read, and that's something that I really need in a contemporary romance. I was talking about this with my roommate Gabby the other day. I just need something else to like cling on to other than the romance if it's going to be contemporary. I think that's why I tend to gravitate towards fantasy, because that is the other thing to grab onto. But in a contemporary romance, I love when there's this element outside of the main relationship I can like sink my teeth into, like the grief and the overall like theme of living life to the fullest, trying not to have these huge regrets. And it was just so emotional. Like I read the last probably 150 pages on a plane ride, and I was just sobbing, but I couldn't stop reading the book because I needed to know what was happening. But I was just crying. I was just crying my eyes out. And I'm sure the guy next to me was like, "Are you okay?" Because he tried to start talking to me after I finished the book, like making sure I was alive. Shout out to him. But there was no way I was going to stop reading because it was so good. And I know I've talked about this before, but the way Allison Cochran writes mental health is just so incredible. There's such good mental health rep in this book. It just feels like it's speaking directly to me, and it's crazy. There's a lot of books out there with good mental health rep. This is one of the best in my opinion. And also it's just amazing romance, and I loved it. So I definitely would recommend this one as well. Next, I want to talk about This Is How to Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Notar. This one is a sapphic sci-fi book, and it follows two time-traveling agents, Red and Blue, from warring futures as they start exchanging letters across time. They start leaving these little notes for each other to find. They start out kind of combative, kind of angry, but kind of devolve into being like friendship and romantic and kind of cursing the position that this world has put them into as enemies when they would truly love to be together. But as their connection deepens, they kind of have to navigate being together could ruin their world. So there's a lot at stake here. When I read this story, it really blew me away. I kind of went into it with mixed expectations. I had heard people say that it was really good, but I'd also heard people say that it was like really challenging to read and really confusing. So I wasn't exactly sure what to expect going into it. My expectations were blown out of the water. It was so good. This is really one of the most beautiful, like emotional, profound love stories that I've read all year. It was really, really incredible. I actually read this book in my vlog where I read the shortest books on my shelf, and historically I do really love a book with sparse prose. I just think that it's very impressive. Complicated emotions and relationships and worlds can be conveyed in very few words, and I really think that this book is a perfect example of what that means to me. And I really just think the writing was beautiful and very, very impressive, and I just really loved it. And I thought just such a beautiful story was created, and I loved this book a lot. If you're intimidated by it, I wouldn't be. I do think that it's probably good to read it physically the first time. I think the audio could be a little bit confusing, but don't be intimidated by it. It's really good. It's amazing. I loved it so much. Would recommend. I also want to talk about The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry by C.M. Wagner. This is a historical fantasy sapphic romance, and in it we're following Delaria Wells. Delaria Wells is down on her luck. She's a bit of a thief, and she's kind of a con artist as well. This is how she makes her living, basically. But she sees a job posting for magical bodyguard. They need a fire witch, which Delaria is, even though she's not like a very strong one. But she applies to this job like, oh, let me do this, it'll be easy, whatever. But as she's hired and goes on this journey, she's hired to protect this like princess to get her somewhere, I don't know. She realizes that there actually is some very real danger and somebody actually wants the princess dead. And so she gets tangled up in this mystery of trying to figure out who is after the princess and why. And along the way, she also has this romance with a fellow bodyguard in the retinue, Win, and they have like a very cute little romance. It kind of starts out with Deli being like, oh, let me trick Win, who is rich, into falling in love with me for her money. But then Deli like actually falls in love with Win. And it's really campy and fun and ridiculous. I loved it. This was really like my kind of cozy fantasy, because it really had the vibes of like being a cozy kind of low fantasy sort of world, but it did have a really like interesting mystery happening. So I really liked that aspect of like keeping me engaged, keeping the pages turning. But along the way, we also had this really cute romance with Deli and Win. And I read this one in the fall time, and it was just perfect for that. Like I would recommend reading this in fall with like a cozy cup of tea. It was amazing. And I really thought it was hilarious too. Like it was well written, the romance was good, and it was really funny. There were so many moments that were just like ridiculous and hilarious, and I loved all of the side characters as well. There was really a lot to love about this book. This is another one that I think is really underrated, and I went into it like not really expecting a new favorite, but I found one and I really love this book. Next, we're going to talk about Am I the Asshole by Cassie Alexander. This is a book I got in Rainbow Crate, and I just like picked up on a whim because it was really short, but it ended up being such a hit. I really loved it. In this book, our main character is confronted by this bizarre situation when it turns out that her fiance is claiming that she drunkenly agreed to a threesome with the demon, and so his friends bought him a demon summoning kit that's like really expensive, and he keeps guilting her into having this threesome because she agreed to it. She does not remember agreeing to this. She wants to kind of appease her fiance. They're supposed to get married soon. She's not sure like if she's into it, but maybe she'll do it for him. Having all of these feelings about it, they end up doing it. The demon they summon though hones in on our main character and is like, you're hot, I want you. Who is this trash man who's trying to make you do things you don't want to do? And she's like, fuck this. And she just zaps away, basically. Our main character and the demon are enthralled with one another, and they end up like meeting again and having this little romance, and our nasty boyfriend gets his karma. I figured that this book would be a fun time from the description. I wasn't anticipating like how much I actually enjoyed it. I really thought it was like very cute and hot. This one is pretty spicy. This one is the spiciest book on this list, just to warn you, but it was really good. It was like tastefully done in my opinion. But it really had everything I love. Like woman learning her worth, learning to own her sexuality, a supportive demon partner, and a man who gets his karma. Literally, what more could you ask for in a book? And it's less than 200 pages, so read it now, honestly. And the last book I want to talk about is the one I read most recently, and that is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is an incredible fantasy book. It is the first in a trilogy. Of course, it's Sapphic. So in this book, we're following a lot of different characters, but the main two are Princess Melanie and Priya. Melanie is, like I said, a princess. She is the sister of the emperor, but she has displeased the emperor because he's a bad guy. And Melanie refused to partake in this religious ritual that he wanted her to by burning herself on a pyre. She was like, fuck that. And so he threw her in prison. And while Melanie's in prison, she's being attended by Priya, who is a maid of this castle. Priya is connected to the group that is currently trying to rebel against the emperor, and she forms this friendship with Melanie. And so they kind of hatch this plan on how they're going to get Melanie to escape. And Melanie's goal is to overthrow the emperor and install her other brother on the throne. She agrees to like give Priya's people freedom if she is able to complete her plan, and Priya helps her. But along the way, of course, these two have a romance. And we just get like a little sprinkles of it throughout this book. I think it's definitely leading up to be a bigger thing in the next installments in the series, but it was enough to like wet my palate. And just the overarching plot of this book is so incredible, and by the end it turns into this like feminist manifesto, and it's amazing. This book has so many strong women in it, and I think that was my favorite part of it. Like, I wasn't really totally sure where it was going in the beginning, but that's where we ended up, with these fucking women just being like, just owning their power, proving that they are just so much smarter than the men in this book. It was incredible. I loved it. It was such a good first book in a series, and I really cannot wait to read the next books. It really set up such a strong plot, such a strong storyline. And just in general, this was such a good fantasy book. Like, the world was so incredible. It's inspired by like Indian mythology, which was really cool. And so the world was like very rich. So much attention to detail was given. Like, it was just truly incredible writing. So good. And the characters were just done so well also, because they're all very imperfect and very flawed, but they're so very real and so detailed, and I just came to love and root for all of them because they're just trying to do their best in this shitty situation of politics and war, oppression, but they're just trying to do the best that they can, and I was just rooting for them so hard. And honestly, the romance between Priya and Melanie was just like painful in the best possible way, you know, like it was just, they were just pining for each other, and they just like don't know how they could be together in this world, but they just are so drawn to one another, and it was just so beautiful, and I loved it a lot. I really cannot wait to continue this series in the new year. I'm so excited. Okay, and that was my list of the Sapphic books that I read this year that you also need to read that are not to be missed. So definitely check these out if any of them sound interesting, and if you haven't read them already. Let me know which ones sound the best to you in the description down below, or if you agree with anything that I put on this list, or think maybe I missed something, please let me know down below. If you're interested in purchasing any of these books, I do have links in the description. These are affiliate links. I earn a tiny commission if you purchase through them, but of course, no pressure, just there if you want it. You can also follow me on all social media. Those links are in the description. Other ways to support this channel are liking this video, leaving me a comment down below, and also subscribing if this is your first time here, or if you're not already. Would appreciate that. Would appreciate you sticking around. I post videos about queer books twice a week, if not more, so definitely stick around. And I think that is everything from me, so thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.